Jesus, I surrender all to Him. I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him in His presence daily live.
The 6th of December, 1925, Volume 18. The true living in the Supreme Will is precisely this. Jesus must find everything and everyone in the depth of the soul, and with her love, everything must be bound in the soul. Communion of goods in the divine will. Example of the starry heavens. I was doing in my interior my usual acts in the supreme volition, embracing all creation and all creatures, in order to make all of their acts my own, and requite my God with my little love for everything He has done in creation and for everything that creatures should do. But while I was doing this, a thought told me, "You take so much time in doing this, and what is the good that you do? What is the glory that you give to your God?" At that moment, my sweet Jesus moved in my interior, and stretching out His arms, He seemed to want to embrace everyone and everything. Then raising them up, He offered everything to His celestial Father. And then He said to me, "My daughter, the true living in the Supreme Will is precisely this. I must find everything and everyone in the depth of the soul. Everything that my will has issued in creation for the good of creatures must be bound in the soul with her love. By living in my will and by her requital of love, she is already bound to and in possession of all that my will has done and will do. And she loves as my will loves and can love. So given all this, by her truly living in it, and having bound everything to herself, I find in the soul the starry heavens, the refulgent sun, the vastness of the seas, the prairies of flowers. I find everything in her. Therefore is it not right that the soul, hopping from one thing to another, over all that is mine and hers, recognise it, and that playing upon all created things, she impresses on each one of them her kiss and her little I love you, for one who has created so many things to give them to creatures as gifts, displaying to man by this a variety of love for as many things as He created, and how He loves that man be happy, giving him not only what is necessary, but also the surplus. But this is not all. Not only must I find the whole creation, but the true living in my will binds everyone. And therefore I must find in the soul, as though in act, Adam holy, as he came out of my creative hands, as well as Adam guilty, humiliated and crying, so that she may bind herself to him in the state of sanctity, and taking part in his innocent and holy acts, she may give me glory and make the whole creation smile again, and sharing in his tears with him, she may long for that Fiat rejected which had caused so much ruin. I must find in her the prophets, the patriarchs, the holy fathers with all her acts, and if those longed for the Redeemer, you will long for my supreme Fiat, as a triumph and fulfilment of their sighs. I want to find my inseparable Mama with all her acts, in which my will operated so many portents, having full dominion. I want to find all of myself and all of my acts. In sum, I want to find all my things, all that belongs to me, all that my supreme will has done and will do, because these are all things which are inseparable from me, and it is just and necessary that they become inseparable from one who lives in my will. So if I do not find everything, it cannot be said that she lives completely in my will. and in looking at her I do not find in her all of my things, but I see them scattered outside of the soul, and I cannot receive her requital of love for all that belongs to me. Have I perhaps not created the creature so that she be a little world and a little God? This is why I always say to you that the living in my will is not yet known. And I keep teaching you now one thing, now another, and I expand your capacity so that all my things and all the good which my will has issued may enter into you. I want to hear you repeat to me your requital of love in everything that belongs to me. I do not tolerate, for one who lives in my will, not to know all of my things and not to love them and possess them. Otherwise, what would be the great prodigy of living in my will? After this, my sweet Jesus remained silent, and I wandered in the divine volition. Oh, how I would have wanted to place my loving and grateful kiss upon all created things, and my little I love you on all the supreme acts of the divine volition, so as to remain bound, I to them and they to me, to be able to surround my Jesus in me with all the acts of the eternal will. At that moment I saw the starry heavens, and my lovable Jesus resumed his speaking. My daughter, look at the heavens. What order, what harmony among the stars. One star cannot be without the other. They are so bound together that each one sustains the other. Each one is the strength of the other. If, may this never be, even a single star moved from its place, there would be such confusion and disorder in the atmosphere that there would be the danger for everything to end up in ruin. So all the beauty of the heavens lies in the stars remaining, each one in its place, in the common union and in the communicative and attractive force which they have among themselves, and which more than electricity keeps them suspended and bound to one another. Man is the new heaven, more than the heavens above the earth. It can be said that each creature is an animated star, that which the first man Adam did, up to the last one who will come. Everything was to be in common among them. So man was to possess not his own strength alone, but the strength of all. All goods were to be in common among them. My will, more than electricity, was to bring the bond among them, and the communication of all that is good and holy. And even though each man was to do his own office and occupy himself with different actions, since all were to start from the primary point of my will, all were to be converted into light. And therefore each one was to be the light for the other. Therefore my sorrow in seeing this heaven of creatures messed up was so great as to be incomprehensible to human creature. Once my will was removed, which binds everyone and links everything, entered disorder, confusion, disunion, darkness, weakness. Poor heaven of creatures. It can no longer be recognized, and only the living in my will reorder this heaven again and will make it shine with new light. This is why I tell you that I want to find everyone and everything in you. My will, primary act of all celestial and terrestrial creatures, will bring you the communication of all their acts, and you will remain bound to them, and they to you. So the living in my will encloses everything and everyone. Therefore be attentive, for I want to give you the greatest thing that exists. But I want from you great things and highest attention. One who gives much, much wants to receive. End of the reading. The 6th of December 1926, Volume 20. Pact between Jesus and the soul. How an act can only be called perfect when the divine will reigns in it. This morning it seemed that my always lovable Jesus did not make me struggle so much for his coming. Even more, he even spent a long time with me, which he had not done for so long. In fact, if he comes now, his little visit is always very short, nor does he give me time to tell him anything. He alone says what he wants to tell me, or he speaks and speaks with the endless light of his volition, so much so that Jesus himself remains eclipsed in this light, and I with him. And so we both lose sight of each other, because that light is so strong and dazzling, and the littleness and weakness of my sight cannot sustain it. Therefore I lose everything, and also Jesus. Now, while he was with me, the fidgets of his love were such and so many that his heart was beating very strongly. Leaning his chest upon mine, he made me feel his ardent heartbeats, and drawing his lips close to mine, he poured into me part of that fire that was burning him. It was a liquid that, while being like liquid fire, was so very sweet, but of a sweetness that cannot be described. However, among those rivulets that poured into my mouth, coming out of his mouth like many little fountains, there were some bitter rivulets that the human ingratitude was sending deep into the heart of my sweet Jesus. Jesus had not done all this for a long time, while before he used to do it almost every day. Now, after pouring himself out with me, after pouring into me what he had in his most holy heart, he said to me, "My daughter, we must make a pact, that you must do nothing without me, and I must do nothing without you." And I, "My love, it is beautiful. I like this pact, to do nothing without you. And when you do not come, what shall I do? So I must remain idle and without doing anything? And then you place your will in me, and I am unable to will anything but what you want. So you will always win and will do whatever you want, and without me." And Jesus, all goodness, resumed his speaking. "My daughter, when I do not come, you must not remain without doing anything. No. You must continue doing what we have done together, what I have told you that I want you to do. This is not doing things without me, because it has already passed between me and you, and it remains as if you were always doing it together with me. And besides, don't you want me to always win? The winning of your Jesus is your gain. So if you win, you lose. If you lose, you win. However, be certain that I will do nothing without you. This is why I placed in you my will, and with it my light, my sanctity, my love, my strength, so that if you want my light, my sanctity, my love, my strength, you may dominate in them and take the light you want and the sanctity, the love, the strength that you want to possess. How beautiful it is to see you possess my dominions that make me reach the extent of doing nothing without you. These pacts I can only make with one in whom my will dominates and reigns." Then after this I was doing my usual acts in the supreme Fiat, and I thought to myself that I wanted to hide my little love, my meagre adoration, and everything that I could possibly do within the first acts that Adam did when he possessed the unity of the light of the divine will, and within those of the Queen Mama that were all perfect. And my adored Jesus added, "My daughter, only when an act encloses within itself all other acts together, then can it be called perfect. And my will alone encloses this perfect act, that while it does one act alone, all possible and imaginable acts that exist in heaven and on earth gush forth from this single act. This single act of my will is symbolized by a fount. While the fount is one, from it gush seas, rivers, fire, light, heaven, stars, flowers, mountains and earth. Everything comes out of this one fount. Now, Adam, in the state of innocence and the height of the sovereign queen, by possessing my will, if they loved, in that love they enclosed adoration, glory, praise, blessing, prayer. Nothing was missing in their littlest act. In it flowed the multiplicity of the qualities of the single act of my supreme volition that made them embrace everything. And so in one act they gave to their Creator whatever befitted him. So if they loved, they adored. If they adored, they loved. Isolated acts that do not embrace all acts together cannot be called perfect. They are meagre acts that give of human will, and therefore only in the Fiat can the soul find true perfection in her acts and offer a divine act to her Creator. End of the reading. The 6th of December 1927, Volume 23, State of the Soul. How sorrow and bitternesses do not enter the divine will because they are human birth. The divine way. How the divine will has its life in the midst of creatures and how they hamper it. How each act done in it is a divine signature that circulates. Example. I continue in my abandonment in the divine Fiat, and since I was totally without my highest good, Jesus, I felt such bitterness and sorrow that I am unable to express it. But at the same time, I felt imperturbable peace and the happiness of the light of the supreme volition. So I thought to myself, what change in my poor soul! Before, if blessed Jesus deprived me of himself for a little while, even just for hours, I was restless, I raved, I cried. I felt myself the unhappiest of creatures. Now all the opposite. I am without him not for hours but for days. And even though I feel an intense sorrow, penetrating deep into the marrow of my bones, yet it is without restlessness, without delirium, without being able to cry as if I had no more tears, all peaceful, intrepid, and happy. Holy God, what change! At the thought of being happy without Jesus, I feel myself dying, but my happiness is not touched. I feel that happiness leaves sorrow free, and sorrow leaves happiness free. Each of them follows its course, its way, and has its place, but they do not mix together. Ah, Jesus, Jesus, how can you not help me? Don't you have pity on me? How can you not run, not fly to her, the little daughter of your will, whom you said you loved so much? But while I was pouring out my sorrow, he just barely moved in my interior and told me, Daughter of my will, why do you trouble your peace, your happiness? Know that where my will reigns, it is like a noble divine queen. It possesses immense joys and happinesses without end. Sorrow, tears, bitternesses are born in time, all births of the human will. They are not born in eternity, nor are they births from it. They are limited and finite. Therefore they do not have the power to enter even slightly into the sea of the happinesses of my divine volition. This is the divine way, and in this state did the Queen of Heaven and my very humanity find themselves. All our sorrows, and they were so many and of all kinds, could not decrease nor penetrate into the summit of our endless joys and happinesses. So, before, your restlessness, your tears and disturbances, when you would not see me for a little while, were the remains of your human will. But mine does not admit these weaknesses, and since by nature it does not possess them, wherever it reigns, it dominates sorrow as queen. It makes it circulate, but it does not permit that it enter into its happiness, with which it has filled its creature, by reigning in her. Sorrow would not find the place in which to put itself within the endless sea of the happiness of my adorable will. Do you perhaps not want it to reign in you, that you become worried about the change you feel within your soul? My divine will has its life, and when the soul opens the doors of her will to let it enter and dominate, it enters into the soul and carries out its life in her, fully divine. And queen as it is, it forms in her its life of light, of peace, of sanctity, of happiness. And the creature feels all of its goods as her own properties. And if she feels sorrow, she feels it in a divine way that brings no harm to all that my divine will has communicated to her. On the other hand, with one who does not open the doors to it, to let it enter and dominate, its life remains suspended in the creature, hampered and without being carried out. It happens to my divine fiat as it could happen to a creature who wants to bring all goods to another creature, and this one, with horrendous ingratitude, binds her feet and her hands in order not to let her get close. She closes her mouth so as not to let her speak. She blindfolds her so as not to be looked at. Reduced to such a state, how can she do to her the good she would want to do? If the other one binds her feet in order not to let her get close, her hands so as not to receive the good that she's bringing to her, her mouth so as not to let her tell her what she's bringing, her eyes so as not to be drawn by her gazes to open the door to her. What sorrow would this not be for the bearer of so much good? In this state is my will put by creatures when they do not open the doors of their will to let it carry out its life. What sorrow, my daughter, what sorrow. After this I continued thinking about the divine will, bearer of so much good, and my sweet Jesus added, my daughter, my love for one who lets my divine fiat reign and dominate is so great that for each act she does in it, the divinity surrenders a divine right to the soul. That is a right of sanctity, of light, of grace, of happiness. And with these rights it binds the soul and renders her the possessor of divine goods. So each additional act done in my divine volition is a signature that is executed by your Creator, as if he were writing for you the deed to render you the owner of his happiness, of his light, his sanctity and grace. It happens as when a rich man loves a poor lady who never goes out of his house, and if she goes out, it is only to visit the properties of her lord, to bring to her lord the fruits of his farms, so as to render him happy with his very goods. The rich man looks at the poor lady, he becomes fond of her, he sees her happy in his house. But in order to be sure of her happiness, he writes a public deed of donation of his goods to the poor one who has wounded his heart, who remains always in his house, and uses his very goods to make her beloved Lord happy. So it is for one who lives in our divine will. She lives in our house. She uses our goods to glorify us and make us happy. The disparity between her and us would cause us pain. It would weigh upon our paternal heart. But since no pains or unhappinesses can enter our divine volition, we act with magnanimity. At each act of hers, we place our signature, writing the deed of donation of our goods to make her happy and rich of our very happiness. This is why I repeat to you often, be attentive, my daughter, let nothing escape you, because each of your acts in our will are signatures that circulate, and divine signatures, with which it is assured that the divine will is yours and that you belong to it. Divine bonds never fail. They are eternal bonds. End of the reading. End of part 2 of today's readings.